Okay, we'll now have a look at a couple of example programs in JustBasic to get an idea of how to write some simple if statements. So I'm going to use JustBasic, as I've said. The syntax is very similar to what you would find in Visual Basic or Sharp Develop. However, the syntax is very different to what you would find with a language like C or C++ or Java. However, the logical structure of what we're doing and the way that we're constructing the if statements and where the code blocks go, the true and the false, is the same regardless of language. So we'll start with a nice simple example, and what I will do, I will simply cut and paste the code in, and what you can do is pause the video and type the code in yourself. I'm purposefully doing that so that you don't just cut and paste the code yourself. You do actually type it in, and the act of typing it in will help you understand it, hopefully. So this program has an input statement which will collect some information from the user. It will output the message what age is the customer, and the user input will be stored in the variable iAge. We then have our if statement. So if iAge is less than the value 18, we then jump to the true code block, which is this statement here. So if iAge is less than 18, we will print sorry, the customer is too young to be served. So in this case, we're making the assumption that we may be working with a program that could be used by a till assistant in a checkout of a shop to make sure that, or to check that they are checking the age of the people buying alcohol, for example. The false case, so if iAge is not less than 18, in other words it's 18 or more, then we can print out please scan item until, in other words it's okay. So we can test this program. So I've just hit the play button to run it. So if we put in an age of somebody who is blatantly not legally allowed to buy the alcohol, they're 12 years old, sorry the customer is too young to be served. So that's working as we expected. Let's try with somebody who is 18. Please scan item until, so that's working as expected. Let's make sure that somebody who's 17 can't slip through the net. That's fine. So sorry the customer is too young to be served. And a final test might be that somebody over the age of 18, so not just 18 but over the age of 18. So let's try 21 for example, and that is saying please scan item until, so that's working as expected. So that's a very simple example. We've only got one statement in the true code block and one statement in the false code block. So the next example is a little bit more complicated, not necessarily more complicated in its logic, it's just got more lines of code, and the reason is that this program is explaining to the user in a little bit more detail what's going on. So when this program runs, it outputs several print statements which will say this program will ask for two numeric values, these will then be compared and the largest value will be printed to the screen. We then print a blank line, that's what that statement does. And we then have an input statement which asks the user to enter the first value, which is stored in I number 1. The second input statement then asks for the second number to be input, which is stored in I number 2. So we've got our two values in I number 1 and in I number 2. We then output a couple of blank lines with a little statement to the user saying compare the numbers. And we then have our if statement. So if I number 1 is greater than I number 2, so if I number 1 is bigger, then the true code block outputs the value that is in the variable I number 1. The semicolon here means the next print statement follows on the same line. So our next print statement is the greater value, this was the first value entered. So if I number 1 was 5 for example, our output statement in its entirety would be 5 is the greater value, this was the first value entered. The false condition, so if I number 1 is not greater than I number 2, we'll then do exactly the same except print out the value that is stored in the variable I number 2 followed by this was the second value entered. So let's run this program with a couple of sets of test data. Again, if you're typing this in yourself, you can pause the video and copy the code. So the program's now asking us for the first number, so let's put the value 5. Thanks, please input the second number, so let's put 7. Comparing the numbers, so 7 is the greater value and this was the second value entered, so that's correct, that is what happened. Let's run it again, and this time we'll enter 5 and 3. So 5 is the first number and it's the biggest number. So 5 is the greater value, this was the first value entered. So that's working as expected. A final test we can do here, however, is, well, what about the numbers being the same? So both values are 5. Well, here our program has not necessarily got it wrong, but it could be misinterpreted. It's saying 5 is the greater value, which I guess is not incorrect, but it's also not correct. And it's saying this was the second value entered. Well, it was, but it was also the first value entered. So our program is a little bit ambiguous there in its output. What we need to do here is do a little bit more processing. We've assumed that if number 1 is not greater than number 2, then number 2 is bigger. We have omitted to test for the condition of the values being equal to each other, so we need to add that condition in. We can add that in any number of different places. A logical place to do it, we could do it at the beginning, or we could do it after we've checked to see if number 1 is greater than number 2. So I've already got some pre-prepared code, which again I'll cut and paste in, and I'm going to paste that over those 2 lines there. And what we've now got is an additional if statement, and this if statement, if, else, end if there, is in its entirety the false code block for the first if statement. So this if statement is embedded, it's nested within the first if statement. So what will happen now is, if number 1 is not greater than number 2, we can then do a check to see if number 2 is greater than number 1. And if it is, we will output the same answer that we did earlier, which was printing that the second value was the greater. If that condition evaluates to false, then there's only one thing left that it can be. The 2 values must be the same. So we don't need to do a check to see if they are the same. If our program gets to this point, then the 2 values must be the same, because number 1 isn't greater than number 2, and number 2 isn't greater than number 1. So let's run this. It's sensible now to test the program again with the original test data, just to make sure that we haven't altered the functionality that was already working. So we'll test with 5 and 7, and that's correctly reporting that 7 is the greater value and that this was the second value entered. We'll do the same with 5 and 3. So 5 is the greater value and this was the first value entered, and then we will do the same with 5 and 5, and it's now correctly saying that the 2 values are the same. So those are some nice simple examples. We'll look at nested if statements later on in the module, so don't worry about that. So have a go at typing those in, and as I said earlier, it might be appropriate for you to pause the video so you can copy across the code. I don't want you to cut and paste the code, I want you to type it in so that you get practice in entering it. Okay, so have fun with those, and if you get any issues we can deal with those in the tutorials in class.